Hi, I'm Andy Brandt of Code Sprinters, and I would like to introduce you to Scrum. Scrum is a project management method which belongs to the Agile family, and it's simple, which is a good thing. It's just 3 roles to fill, 3 meetings to go to, and 2 lists to maintain. So it's quite easy to start with it. So let's look at those elements in more details. I will be speaking about the roles, which is the team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master. I will be speaking about the lists or the backlogs, which keep the functions that we want to have in our software. I will talk about sprints, which are the time box iterations of work. Time box means that deadlines cannot move. And last but not least, I will show you how a team uses meetings to inspect and adapt what they are doing. So let's start with the roles. And we have following 3 roles. The first is most important is the team. And the idea of Scrum, as the idea of all the Agile methods, is that the team organizes itself. It has no predefined structure to itself. And the sprints and the team's goal is to deliver whatever the sprint goal is. And the sprint goal is what the team decided to embark upon at the beginning of a sprint. Now, the product owner is a very important figure, which is not part of the team. And that is the person who is supposed to know what the product should look like. Now, they don't have to know upfront everything about the product, but at the outset of each sprint, they should be able to tell in detail how the features or the requirements that are to be fulfilled in this sprint should look like, or what they are looking for. And also, they should be able to define priorities, which is very important. So they should be able to say, okay, this is the most important, and that should be done next. And this is something for later, and this is a nice have that we might get to when we can. And last is the Scrum Master. And it's no accident that he's last, or she. Scrum Master is the coach of the team. He's the person responsible for keeping the Scrum process, guarding it, but also for listening to the team and coaching the team to achieve maximum productivity. And also, Scrum Master is responsible for removing impediments that the team might encounter. Those 3 roles are all there is to Scrum when it comes to structure. Now, Product Owner and Scrum Master are single roles, and by very nature, the team should have at least 3 to maximum 10 people. So let's look at the lists, and we have 2 lists which are called backlogs in sprint lingo. And the first one is the so-called product backlog. And the product backlog is a list of features or functionality that is to be developed. And they are usually described as user stories. And let's look at an example. A user story is a plain English description of something that a user role should be able to do with the system. So here we have an example. As a client, I can create a profile on the system. It's pretty straightforward. There might be some detailed questions that might be asked to the product owner about, for example, what should be inside the profile, what fields, maybe files, maybe a photo, etc. And then we have another, as a client, I can choose a password and a user ID, etc., etc. Those are typical for a website, but you can put almost all the requirements there are, except performance requirements probably, as user stories. And here we see numbers, and those numbers are estimates. Those estimates can be expressed in various units depending on what your team uses, what your custom is. It can be so-called ideal days, or trying to imagine how many days it would take an ideal developer if he was doing only that thing to complete this user story or deliver the software that would enable it to be completed by the user. Another idea, which is what we use, is story points. And story points are a relative measure of complexity. So let's say the second task on this list is almost twice as complex as the first one, and it doesn't say much more than that. However, the product backlog function is it's not only to capture the list of user stories, but also to capture the priority. So whatever is on the top of the list is the most important at this moment. Whatever is at the bottom might be a nice have that we might get to at some point. Another idea which comes from that is that therefore the things that are on top of the product backlog should be described in much detail, and they should be fairly small. The things that are kind of captured for later on the product backlog can be larger and it can be described in more general terms. And the idea is that as they will be moved up by the product owner, they will have to be split or broken down into smaller user stories. So this is the product backlog, and this is where the product owner lives, because the idea is that ideally the product owner is the one who puts the items on this list and who can provide developers with answers to questions like the ones in example that I have discussed, like for example what's to be on this profile. Okay, so that's one list. The other list is so-called sprint backlog, and we'll get to that how it's created later on. But basically the product backlog describes everything that is to be ideally done in an application or a system or whatever is being developed. A sprint backlog describes in more detail what is to be done within one sprint or within one iteration. So let's look at an example again. And here we have a sprint backlog, and this sprint backlog is an example for a product backlog item that we have seen on the previous example. So as a client, I can choose a password and a user ID. That's the item from the product backlog that was taken into the sprint, and this is a phrase in Scrum lingo that means that the team decided it was on top of the list, and the team decided to commit to delivering this user story within this sprint. So it's now on the sprint backlog, and it was broken down by the team into so-called tasks. And tasks, as you can see from the wording, they are not describing user interaction with the system. They are rather describing what the programmers or testers or whoever is on the team has to do to deliver the user story in question. Now, those are estimated usually in hours, and the idea is that they reflect how many hours, to our best belief, it will take to deliver or to do that task. And so, for example, for the first task here we have 2 hours, and those estimates on the sprint backlog are then updated during daily scrums throughout the sprint. I will talk about that later, but the idea is that they don't have to shrink necessarily, because they are an outlook into the future. So if we start the first task, create DB tables for passwords and user IDs, and after 1 hour of work, the developer in charge of that decides that it will take still 3 hours to do it, he's supposed to update that into 3 hours. Okay, so I started to talk about the process a bit. So let's look at the process itself, and this is a diagram that will return to us throughout my presentation. So we start with a product backlog, and we are supposed to produce software in the end. So let's look at the steps. Now, the first step we discussed, which is the product backlog. Before the first sprint can start on a project, the product backlog has to be created and then prioritized, or in other words, sorted. So the most important stuff has to be on top and the least important on the bottom. And this is primarily product owner's job, though the team is supposed to help the product owner by estimating the tasks, so that the product owner can know how many difficult tasks are on the top, bottom, or whatever. So the actual kickoff of a sprint is the next step here, which is the sprint planning meeting. And during the sprint planning meeting, the sprint backlog will be produced. So let's look at sprint planning. Now, sprint planning is the final sprint prioritization, which is final sorting before the sprint planning starts. And then is the proper planning, which starts with the team selecting a sprint goal. Now, during a sprint, the team might be working to deliver a few backlog items, but usually there is some general theme to the sprint. So, for example, we might want to deliver user registration this sprint, and this is the major feature on our sprint backlog, or the major feature on top of the product backlog that we are taking to be developed. And there are some other features that are probably unrelated, but this is, in our opinion, the most important goal. And then the team analyzes the backlog and takes the items into the sprint, creating the sprint backlog. And it's achieved with those simple steps, which are: select the item on top of the product backlog, thus honoring the prioritization done by the product owner. Then the team discusses the item in detail. They might ask product owner some questions at this point, and they try to really design and preliminarily design and imagine what tasks will be necessary to deliver that particular backlog item. Those tasks are captured on the sprint backlog in the form that I have been showing you in my example. They can be assigned, which means people can volunteer. Okay, I will do that tasks, and someone else will do the other tasks. Sometimes all the tasks for one item will be done by just one person. That depends on the domain, and also depends on local customs of the team. For example, at code sprinters, we do it so that people volunteer for tasks, but they have certain specializations. So we have someone who is a bit better on databases, and someone who feels more confident with UI design, and they can work together on a single item, having their separate tasks. After that is completed, the team can see, using a Scrum tool like our Banana Scrum project, or some other tool like Scrumworks or Xplanner, or a traditional project wall, they can see how many hours they have of work they have planned for that backlog item. They see how many backlog items they have already. So the team asks itself, with a little help from Scrum Master, can we commit to anything more? Can we take anything more from sprint? And if the answer is yes, then the process repeats itself. We look again at the product backlog, and we take the item from the top and consider it, etc. Sometimes at the end of this planning, if there is just little room left, the team feels they have a little room left, they might skip a large task which is immediately on top and take a task which is below it. This is allowed. And the result of those steps is the sprint backlog, which I have shown you in my example at the beginning of our presentation. What now happens is that finally, after all these processes and preparations, the real work has to start. Real in quotes, because that is also real work, but I digress. Now the programming starts, the development starts. The sprint starts, and once this meeting is over, the deal with the product owner or a client is that the sprint backlog cannot change until the sprints end now. The product owner can alter the product backlog, they can put new stuff on the product backlog, they can change the order, but the next time anything will be taken from the product backlog will be at the beginning of the next sprint, unless the team will do every work that is to be done before the end of the sprint, and they feel they can take in something more. But normally, the product backlog is now in the hands of the product owner, and the sprint and the team is not looking at the product backlog. The team works on the sprint backlog, and developers develop, testers test, and designers design, and the work is progressing. But the pinnacle of the Scrum process is the daily Scrum meeting, which occurs every day, as the name implies. And let's look now in detail at this meeting. It's supposed to last very shortly, only 15 minutes or about 15 minutes. The idea is that only the team and the Scrum Master can talk on that meeting, but anyone can attend, anyone can listen. And the format of this meeting is precisely defined. Everyone, one after another, answers 3 very important questions. What I was doing since the last Scrum, what I plan to do today or after this Scrum, and what impedes me, what stands in my way, what problems I'm encountering in my work. Now, this is very important to understand that those are kind of reports for everyone. Those are not reports for the Scrum Master, who is not a boss, he's a coach. And they are not reports for any other boss. Those are the answers for the whole team, so that everyone knows where we stand. It's also not a place for technical discussion. If someone has a technical problem, they can say, okay, I was yesterday doing database creation task, but I got stuck. I don't know how to design the structures. Therefore, today my plan is to do it as well. And my impediment might probably be that maybe I don't know Microsoft SQL that well and I would need some help on that. The Scrum Master, who usually leads that meeting, has to listen into that, and then after this meeting closes, maybe start up a discussion about the problems or about some technical details that surfaced during this meeting. Part of that meeting is updating the estimates on tasks. So on the sprint backlog, we have those tasks, we have those hours, and as I said before, all the developers, all the members of the team, not only developers, are required to daily, at least daily, before the daily Scrum, update the hours for each task. If the task is closed, completed, it's marked as such. If the item is delivered, it is marked as such, and it is always an outlook into the future. As I said, it's always how many hours I believe this task will take from now, even though I might have worked on that task before. How much time will it take from now? Now, what is also important that anyone can listen, which means no reporting is needed. And even if someone is not listening and there is something, some kind of IT tool for tracking the Scrum work, like our Banana Scrum tool, there is a thing which is called the burn down chart, and the burn down chart shows the amount of hours remaining on all tasks for every day, and it should decrease towards 0 on the last day of the sprint. And that provides a very quick visual feedback for anyone who might not even be interested in attending the daily Scrum or might not be able to attend the daily Scrum, to see how the team is progressing and how the project is doing day after day. I think this daily meeting is the real pinnacle of the process, as I said. I even think that introducing this very simple format of the meeting, a time-boxed, very succinct meeting with a precisely defined set of questions and answers that can take place, would be very beneficial even for operations teams who don't have objectives other than day-to-day operation. But I think this is the very beneficial thing, to have all the people on the team meet and talk together as a group about what is going on and what is done. It also brings the major value that Scrum brings to any organization, which is immediate visibility of everything. All the problems surface immediately. If a member of a team is stuck on something, they cannot hide with that, and it won't explode before the release without anyone knowing about it. So I think this is something that should be considered, even if you don't want to implement Scrum as a whole. Implementing that simple, small meeting could be priceless for you. Okay. Now, after the end of the sprint, as I said, we are supposed to deliver some results. And this result is called in Scrum literature potentially shippable product increment. Now let's try to decode that wording. Potentially shippable product increment means basically that the product of the Scrum, whatever is developed, has to be of production quality. It has to be of high quality. Potentially shippable means that it has to be tested. It has to be reasonably bug-free. In terms of shrink wrap software, from this world this phrase comes, potentially shippable. It means that theoretically it should be of such a quality, or practically it should be of such a quality that it would be possible to produce shrink wrap packages and send them to clients, and they should be happy with what they are getting. Which means that all the tasks that have been taken, all the items that have been taken into the sprint backlog, they have to be developed into the future, into the features that are tested and of good quality. And that is really very important. Hence, an important part of starting Scrum on a project is establishing a definition of done. Now, definition of done might differ between teams because it depends on the domain, it depends on what you are doing, in other words, it depends on the local customs, it depends on environment. For example, at Code Sprinters we are doing web applications, which means we don't have packages, we don't have really much integration, But we have production servers usually of our clients, and for us, done means that whatever is developed is tested, is documented where documentation is required, and it's fit for production server, which means that if customer agrees, those new features developed within a sprint can be installed on the production server and can be immediately used by the users or customers, whoever is using the system. As I said, for shrink wrap software, or for example for embedded device drivers, the definition of done will be slightly different in wording, but the sense is the same. Whatever is done is to be of high quality, it's to be on production quality. And it's very important because the scope in a Scrum project is a bit flexible. The product owner can change the scope all the time. And if something is not done and it's not of production quality within the sprint, it kind of falls back into the product backlog. It's rare, but the method makes a provision for that, and it does sometimes happen. So the method is so optimized as to fix the quality, and this is a very important fact. So let's get back to our process. I forgot to tell you before, so I will do it now. Sprint length is an important factor. Usually, the sprint length in Scrum literature is said that it should be between 2 and 4 weeks. And this is really true from our experience. We started with 4 weeks, then we went down to 2 weeks, and now on one project we are even doing 1 week sprints. And from what I know, the general practice is indeed that the sprints shouldn't be longer than 4 weeks, and for web development, 2-week sprints work very well. That also means that, for example, for those who are implementing Scrum in a large organization, shorter sprints means that it's easier to defend the process from the business organization, because 2 weeks of advance is something you can expect from any decent manager, and it's easier to push back requests to break the structure and throw away the sprint and start doing something else mid-sprint, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid. This deal that the sprint backlog is not changeable, that whatever we do is not changeable for the duration of the sprint, has two aims. One aim is to ensure that the business can change direction frequently, but the other is that the developers or the team gets enough time to do anything of importance in real quiet. And as we all in software industry know, developing good software takes a lot of concentration and thinking, and interrupting that doesn't work very well. Okay, so at the end of the sprint, what we basically have is a new version of the software that is under development, with new features that were taken from the product backlog during the sprint planning, were split into tasks. Those tasks were worked on by the team, and at the end we have this new potentially shippable product increment or version. It's up to the client or the business whether they really want to show it into production or send it to clients, or maybe they want to make a release after a few sprints when the features accumulate, so to speak. But still, the team needs to show off what they did, which is very good for the team, and it's also very good for interaction with the product owner or all the stakeholders, and hence the sprint review meeting, which happens at the end of each sprint. Now, a sprint review meeting is planned to be an informal presentation of what the team achieved. The idea is that there should be no slides. It should be just a demonstration of functionality. So we might have a projector, we might have team members, and each of the team members should present one of the features showing, okay, we did this feature and it works like this, and clicking around the application or the website, whatever you are developing. Again, it's not a place for an architectural discussion, but it's I think least structured of all the Scrum meetings, because everyone can attend, and it's advisable that all stakeholders attend, and anyone can speak. It should be time boxed to avoid spending the whole day on it, but it's very valuable for the team and also for the stakeholders and the product owner, because usually seeing a feature work makes people invent other features, brings them new ideas, and those ideas can be captured on the product backlog, and then in due time, as decided by the product owner, they can be developed. It's also very good for the team because, as I said, it gives the team an occasion to show off what they did and feel good about their work, and get some praise maybe from the product owner and from the other stakeholders about the stuff that they did, which is very helpful and very good for team cohesion, and basically it's good for human work. And that is more or less all there is all there is to Scrum. So let's sum it all up. First of all, and let's sum it all up most from the client's perspective. First results happen after first sprint, and this is very important. Usually on software projects you have to wait weeks or months until you get any working software, because you start with all kinds of requirements, definitions, discussions, legal discussions maybe, and then there is some development, and a few months into the project you get some beta that you can work with. Here you get first results after first sprint, and understandably on the first sprint usually some technical foundations are laid, but even the Scrum methodology and even the books by Ken Schwaber and others say that at least some usable feature, at least even that's as simple as just being able to log into the system, that should be included even in the first sprint, so that there are first results after the first sprint. Then there are new production quality versions of the software every sprint, which is very nice, especially in web development, because when you have a website you can release it early to clients, and then those clients are kept happy by getting new features on the software that they use every 2 or 4 weeks, which is pretty cool. It's also very important that thanks to the daily Scrum meeting that I was talking about, and the Scrum tracking that is provided either through a project wall, very traditional method, or something very modern, everyone can follow what is done every day, and everyone can feel confident that there is full visibility on the project and there won't be any unforeseen problems or unknown hiccups. Finally, direction can change every sprint, and that is very important because in today's business environment, and especially for example for startup companies, changes of requirements are very frequent, and it's a great way to deal with them, because you always say, okay, so you want these new features, right? There's no need to renegotiate the agreement, there is no need to redo the large huge Gantt chart. What suffices to do is put it on the backlog, and we'll get to it in the next sprint. Then most important features go first, and it's also very valuable thing. The most important features by nature will be put by the product owner on top of the list, so they will be done first, and everything else will be built on top of them or will be linked to them, which means that they will get most of the testing and usage throughout the project, which means they will be of great quality. And finally, project can be stopped at any moment, which is great for outsourced development, like what we practice, because we are not tying in the client, and the client can say stop at any moment. But it's also good for internal projects, because usually at some point you realize that many features that were on the backlog are not really needed, and the product is already very usable as it is. So maybe it's not worth spending all the money on the rest, on the nice-haves, and maybe it's a sensible idea to stop the project. And this method provides a great way of doing so, because at the end of every sprint, every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, you have a fully functioning version of the software. So if you cut the project at this moment, you are left with the fully functioning software, not something that is half done, not integrated, and not worth anything. You still have the working system or software, and you can derive benefits from it. Okay, so that was all. Hope it was useful. As I said, it's a short introduction to Scrum. There are some resources on the page that I'm showing you on the screen. Also links to relevant books and other web pages. If you can afford it, go to Certified Scrum Master Training. I highly recommend that. Though I think you will get best value out of such training if you read the Ken Schwaber's book and try to implement Scrum in your organization. And of course, should you want us to do